Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Business Day Dialogue in partnership with the Business Beer Association, of South Africa this morning. My name is Lynette Nduli, and I have both the honor as well as the very important task this morning of moderating our conversation, but also sensitively weaving together the many dynamics, the many challenges, and even some of the solutions and alternatives that are available to us as you and I, in our respective sectors, in our respective businesses and communities, navigate a third wave, a fourth lockdown in certain industries as well, and then also decide what is required to take us forward. I'm delighted this morning that for this conversation, I'm joined by thought leaders, businesswomen, and advocates for the industry. I'm further delighted by the fact that my panel this morning is quite contrary to the face that is often put up about the alcohol industry as one of mainly and pretty much only women, because these are the unsung heroes, the unseen faces, and the very hard workers within a very complex value chain that sustains not only the beer or the liquor industry, but so many other industries who contribute to the products, who contribute to the services, and ultimately contribute to the economy of the country today. So, really, just to give context to our conversation this morning, South Africa, as many of you will have experienced in varying degrees, is now going through its third wave. And as we look at the issues surrounding what it means to sustain life, but also livelihoods, our government, throughout the various state of disaster regulations and restrictions that have been put in place, has also been working at looking at economic recovery, various alternatives, and also ways in which business, but also our communities can go back to what it is that they do, the spaces that they occupy safely. However, given those alternatives and given some of those plans that have been put in place, perhaps one of the worst hit industries is that of the alcohol trade, with the sale of alcohol on both off-site and on-site consumption having now been banned for the fourth time within this 16-month period. What does this mean for the business owner in the sector who is trying to get back on their feet from the previous bans? What does this mean for the value chain of this industry holistically? And what does this mean for the continued sustainability of small businesses, large businesses, labor, raw materials, as well as the other sectors that are ultimately affected by this sector going through numerous bans? Are there alternatives? Are there different conversations to be had? And these are just some of the difficult, some of the challenging, and some of the thought-provoking questions we'll be putting to our panel today as we engage on what could we have done better? What is the impact of a fourth ban and any prospective bans if they come into play? Touch wood, they won't. But also, what becomes the impact now as we discuss economic recovery on one hand, but what becomes the impact of recovery for this industry as a whole? This morning, I am joined by Patricia Pillay, who is the CEO of the Beer Association of South Africa. I am joined by Apiwe Musani Mawela, who is the owner and founder of Brewster's Craft. I'm also joined this morning by Nadine Johnson, who is an associate consultant for the Euromonitor International, Paula Quincy also joins us from Growth Mind Asset Catalyst. And unfortunately, this morning, we would have loved to have Mamfeni Mukwena, who is the president of the Gauteng Liquor Forum and a tavern owner, but due to unforeseen circumstances, she's been unable to join us this morning. But be that as it may, I'm pretty sure that me and my panel guests will be able to engage, we'll be able to solve a few problems, and we also look forward to the audience who join us this morning from their respective homes, offices, and of course online. We look forward to some of your questions, some of your proposed solutions, and the thoughts that you will share that we'll also make sure and give time to expressing as part of this conversation. So let me jump straight into it. Patricia, good morning. Patricia, over the last week, South Africans have seen you on a number of platforms, and yet again, very strongly advocating for the position of the sector and the industry. And of course, what this ban, a fourth ban, means for your participants, your constituents within the association itself, as well as the economy overall. As CEO of the Beer Association of South Africa, this no doubt puts you in a very, very difficult position, but also a position where I think many of us ask the question that do advocacy groups have the opportunity to engage with government? How has that stakeholder management process rolled itself out? And of course, how are decisions made without consultation before they are imposed? And I'd love you to really give us a context of that advocacy and stakeholder engagement process that an association like yourselves has to counter off with government before such decisions, such seismic decisions, are made on your behalf and on the behalf of a sector and ultimately a country. Does the exchange exist? Does the consultation exist? And where does this put you now?
Morning, Lynette, and morning to my fellow panel members, as well as to all the viewers that are online today. And it's really such a pleasure to be amongst all of these fabulous women today. And as you've rightly said, Lynette, this industry is really made up of a powerhouse of women, despite the myth that the beer world is a man's world. I mean, even if I look at the tavern industry, over 50% of the tavern owners are actually women. So we're really proud as women in this industry. As an industry association and a CEO, I think it really has been an extremely stressful time because, like you said, balancing lives and livelihoods as an argument is not an easy one because you have extremists on either end. But as BASA, we have always maintained that it is possible to do both. And we've put forward many proposals, and that leads to your question in terms of, well, what forums and what panels have been created for us to, and platforms for us to be able to engage government? Well, the one platform that we've used is NEDLAC, which has been created where the social partners sit. And this is where we sit with labor, government, community, as well as business. Now, this platform was created a long time when we had a democracy in this country. So it's a long-standing platform created. And, we would create a very serious platform where we would think that there would be a lot of power given to this and our positions that we put forward at NEDLAC taken forward. But there's a trust that whatever is put forward is indeed taken to the NCCC. But however, when you look at every single decision that's made that we don't get feedback on, we wonder then, are these positions actually taken to the NCCC? And I think, Lynette, that then leads me to say that, in our discussions, we really believe that the NCCC should have a representative from business. So somebody from, for example, like Sispusi at the BLSA who heads that, or somebody like a Cascovadia who's from BUSA, to be able to sit there as a representative voice of business, because decisions then are made in isolation. And we really are working on trust that our proposals put forward at NEDLAC are taken into account.
No, thank you so much, Patricia, for that response. And I think it gives us a sense that, yes, the decisions, the conversations are taking place, but is it filtering through into the actual regulations? And I think the big, broad answer from yourself right now is perhaps no. Well, let me speak next to somebody who is directly impacted by what the regulations mean. Apiwe Mewela, good morning to you, the owner and founder of Brewster's Craft, and a business that I've certainly personally followed, simply because, of the fascination of watching the rise of a young Black female-owned brewing company in South Africa. In 2015, somebody with the right skills, with the right experience, with the correct qualifications in this particular space and field, really breaking the mold and making the industry, the means of production in this industry, open and accessible through the work that you've been able to do. We've watched your business grow, of course, not just your own brand, but you also helping others grow your brands through your manufacturing process. We've watched the business grow from strength to strength, receiving funding and expansion. And I recently read, quite literally with tears in my eyes, an article about your decision to 4 bands later to close this business down. The human side of such a ban and such a decision. Can you give us an insight into what this ban and the journey of the last 16 months have meant for you, particularly in a country where craft brewing is certainly quite a new venture, where there are probably now, after you, no female brewers. And, what does this mean for you as you prepare to move forward, having taken such a heavy and a hard step?
Good morning, Lynette, and good morning to all the other viewers. Yeah, it has been a very, very tough past few months. I remember sitting at home on I think the 28th of March, when we were all watching the president, 28th of March 2020, all watching the president deliver the speech. And at that time, the brewing side of the business had just started like 6 months before, 7 months before. Like as you said, we received funding to set up the plant, and we just started. There was obviously a big hype in the industry because my business model was just not about brewing for myself, but it was more for transforming the industry. So my core goals were around bringing to, when the Liquor Act talks about transforming the liquor industry, I was planning to actually literally do that. And when the president announced the lockdown, I think like everybody else in the country, we were very much for the first 21 days. And when he opened up and moved to level 5, and the liquor industry was then banned, but most of the other industries opened, I was one of the few people that were very vocal from the onset that we need to look at balancing the lives and the livelihoods, because as we know, the liquor industry, the craft beer industry specifically, we are a very small industry. There's about 160 craft breweries across the country just before the COVID happened. And through the months after that, it has been a roller coaster of trying this, trying that. Not just myself, a lot of other people in the industry, all trying to, we looked at, there was a time where we all went and made non-alcoholic products, trying to sell those. I looked at making sanitizers at some point. I know there's other breweries that actually did do that, but going through the red tape has been quite difficult. And each alcohol ban that we've had, we've always hoped it's the last one. And we kept on saying, I'm just barely hanging. For me, it was every single one. Oh my God, I'm just barely hanging on, trying to survive, waking up every single morning saying, I need to just try this one more time. I remember coming to the brewery, I think it was during the 3rd ban, where I literally closed the office and cried, because I was like, I've been trying and trying and trying, and this thing just keeps on coming back. When you think it's done and you think you are now ready to start moving forward, then another ban comes your way, and in Easter we had the restrictions, and obviously at that time there was talk of a third wave coming, which is we're currently in at the moment. So it just has been a very much a very difficult, emotionally strenuous. Even today I'm still quite emotional about it. The decision to close shop is not one that just happened easily, because it's something I've taken years on building, and not just by myself. And being a epitome of what I'll call Black excellence, because the brewery itself has been celebrated by a lot of Black people as obviously breaking boundaries and making it making people aware that this is possible. And for me, that has been what keeps me going, and what keeps me going forward, to say, I've done it. I might have been the first, but definitely not the last. And we just need to keep pushing and keep going.
Sure. Thank you so much, Apiwe. And Apiwe, just layered into the response that you've just given me, there's a few more questions I'd love to ask. But I think before I get to the questions, I'd like to bring home again to what you have just taken us through, the day in the life, the big decisions that you're now currently making, and the emotional, personal impact of what this means. I'd love to get Nadine Johnson from the Euromonitor International on the line with us now. Now, Nadine, we typically are speaking about lives and livelihoods, which technically almost becomes a very emotive and often a more of a qualitative conversation when we speak about the bans. But beyond that, within the context of this industry are real numbers, percentages, statistics that relate to both lives and livelihoods. Please, can we just ask you, with some of the work that obviously Euromonitor does as a research engine and a think tank, and some of the very in-depth analysis that you do, can you please just give us some of the big statistics that we're currently focused on, particularly when we talk about the ban? How much is the alcohol industry in South Africa worth? How many people work in this industry? What is the size of this value chain? And what are some of the key performance indicators that you've been watching and have now perhaps been grossly affected by what is a fourth ban and a fourth stoppage in a very, very short amount of time?
Hi, Lynette. Thank you so much for the question, and also good morning to all the panelists and also the viewers. So indeed, the alcohol industry is a really large industry in South Africa. To put it into statistics, it's worth about, just prior to the pandemic, it was worth about 180 billion rand in value terms. And having taken into consideration the impact of COVID-19, and then, of course, the impact of the ban on the industry, it is now only worth around 160 billion rand. So having lost around 40 to 50 billion rand during the year. And this is essentially a direct impact of the ban that has had on the legal alcohol market. Of course, with beer accounting for almost 50% of this in value terms, it's been driven by a high volume loss to the industry. Of course, the alcohol industry also employs a number of individuals across the value chain. So not only those people that are actually selling and manufacturing alcohol, but also those that are growing the fruit that goes into wine, for example, or those that are packaging bottles that are in the packaging industry, in the logistics and distribution industry. And essentially, it has had a ripple effect from across this value chain, and really had a loss to the impact of, a loss to the impact on jobs and lives. And I think what some of the research that we had undertaken in response to the alcohol bans, and also in response to what some of the incentives are for individuals who have lost their lives, who have lost their livelihoods, that's, in many cases end up looking to do looking for alternative means of survival. And in this case, our research that we undertook at the beginning of this year was really to understand what the impact of this ban has had on the illicit alcohol market. And one of the key drivers that we've seen in relation to the bans and the incentives that individuals undertake in the illicit market is essentially for profit-making incentives. Many of these individuals struggle to support themselves in the informal markets, and also have a difficulty to make it in the sort of formal market, and hence resort to criminal activities and manufacturing of illicit alcohol, manufacturing of counterfeit alcohol, and essentially also even creating their own alcohol for the purposes of selling this. So essentially the ban has impacted not only those individuals in the legal market, but also those that would have, not only those in the alcohol market, but also those that are, in the related industries, the glass industry, the agricultural industry, and filtered through to impacting the informal economy and those most vulnerable as well.
Nadine, it's quite interesting. You made, the point about illicit trade and how alternatives in themselves and seeking alternatives has also inadvertently put operators in a position in certain instances. And I guess this is a sign of desperate times calling for those desperate measures. And they found themselves also then, in contradiction with what is the right regulated thing to do. I know that we have specifically just spoken about the beer industry as perhaps, the largest, but also then the largest, most affected industry. We've spoken about some of the partners for the actual projects, bottles and the like. But are there any indicators that you're also starting to see, that represents a similar conundrum within the wine industry? Because we've got that. We've also got the whiskey industry in South Africa. We've got so many other, craft brewing. Obviously, Apiwe has also given us an insight into the size of that. But where else in the industry do you see certain risk, as we move through these bans as well?
So I think if we're thinking about the different types of alcohols that are at risk, I think all of them are at risk in some form or another. If we were thinking about the types of alcohol in the legal market, of course, beer is one of the most highest volume driven types of alcohol categories. Spirits, on the other hand, are more of they obviously have a bit of a higher premium and a pricing segment. So these categories would be most vulnerable to price sensitivity by consumers. But if we were to think about the illicit alcohol industry and which of these categories are most vulnerable, so first we have to consider what is illicit alcohol. So it usually, in South Africa, it usually relates to that of the spirits industry, being that it's counterfeited products. It's very much easier for an individual to manufacture a counterfeit spirit versus a counterfeit beer. So spirits market tends to be at a much higher risk than the beer market in terms of counterfeited products. But we also do see smuggling of beer in through duty-free channels across the borders. And we're also seeing, in terms of individuals actually trying to brew their own beer. We all know in South Africa that umqombothi is a very popular traditional beer, and something that's driven by the culture in South Africa. But the challenge comes in when individuals add very harmful substances. They add products that are not necessarily meant for human consumption, such as synthetic ethanol, which is the same products that get used also in ethanol and counterfeiting and in fake products, which means that it's not just a risk for the industry, but it's also a risk for individuals' health and consumers' health and concerns around that.
Thanks for that, Nadine. As we just talk about, obviously, the illicit alcohol trade, one of the very big and very contentious dialogues that I think certainly everybody's had in their homes, amongst our various circles of influence, and even at this particular level is, the role of alcohol in a society. And, why are we both so upset, in certain instances, even delinquent, about the alcohol bans in South Africa? Now, South Africa, and if you go all the way back, has a very, very, very interesting history and a very interesting socialization and even socioeconomic history related to the role of alcohol in our society. And it's woven into many different facets of the fabric of who our society is, for better and for worse. And I think, for many of us, we've obviously heard that the alcohol bans, and a big part of why the decisions around it have been made, is so as to reduce the incidences of violence in the home, violence, out in civic society, but also reduce the number of trauma cases, whether they come from that violence, car accidents and the like as well, so as to relieve the pressure on our health system as we try to weave and work our way through this pandemic. And that's perhaps probably been sort of the biggest and the forerunning thought and driver behind the decision around the ban. So I really want to bring Paula Quincy from Growth Mindset Catalyst into this particular conversation. And Growth Mindset Catalyst, ladies and gentlemen, really specifically looks at creating healthy relationships at home, looks at specifically looking at the impact of mental health on all of our lives, what roles everything from gender-based violence to socialization have on a person's mental health and their ability to integrate normally and in a healthy way in a society. Dealing with stress, many of us have had stress, whether that stress was caused by homeschooling or the loss of a livelihood. Paula, let's just wade into the psychology of alcohol, and of course then the roundhouse impact of the alcohol ban and our relationship with it as South Africans. We've seen that whilst we've dealt with the coronavirus pandemic, many other pandemics have also, older pandemics have also raised their ugly head in South Africa, particularly if we look at gender-based violence and different traumas as well throughout the context of this year. Please give us an insight in terms of just some of the work that you have been doing, and of course, how the links have played into part. And with that, may I perhaps give us an insight on whether have bans made society's mental health more fragile or not? And where do we all stand, against the logical, the emotional, the socialized approach to trying to get through this major pandemic, without loss of both lives and livelihoods and without too much further trauma and damage to our communities and the people in them?
Thanks, Lynette. Definitely some very deep topics there that you've mentioned. So I'm going to touch on mental health first in terms of how has the pandemic affected our mental health. And so we are really feeling it at a very core level. It was touched on earlier in terms of the losses that we've experienced. The very real loss of, at a very basic survival level, to be able to provide food and shelter for ourselves and our loved ones, due to salary cuts and job losses and industries being seriously impacted by the pandemic and the lockdowns that we've been experiencing. And on top of that, then we've also experienced some other very real losses, not only the death of loved ones and not being able to go through our traditional mourning processes and the way that we, celebrate or symbolize those kind of events to get closure for us. And then also the loss of, for many of us, loss of purpose, loss of identity, and loss of life the way that we knew it. generally when change comes about, we have an opportunity to buy into it, we process it, and we approach it with positivity. Whereas with the pandemic, we didn't really have a choice. One day life was fine, and the next day we were thrown into lockdown, and our whole worlds were thrown upside down. And with that, removing our basic sense of freedom and movement. So all of that has increased our mental health challenges that we've been facing, and we've seen the stats increase. So SADC, South African Depression and Anxiety Group, have done surveys, and they've shown an increase in terms of 55% when it comes to anxiety and panic, 46% financial stress and pressure, 40% depression, and so on. So it's impacted us at an individual level. It's impacted us in terms of family dynamics, stress and pressure on the home front, and obviously from a business perspective as well. And then with that, the industry, particularly around the different coping mechanisms that we use, and we know that alcohol is one of the coping mechanisms that we turn to, not only from a socialization point of view and having fun, but also coping in terms of just releasing pressure and stress, and also escaping our reality. So we've definitely seen that. And obviously then a link to that is gender-based violence. But alcohol is not the only cause of gender-based violence. It is definitely a symptom of it, and it contributes to it, but is not the only cause of gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, Paula. Let me go back to Patricia. Patricia, I think, having gone around the virtual room, as it were, we've heard some really interesting statistics, perspective, and even experiences. And I think if there's one position you fully appreciate at this point in time, is that there has to be the balance between saving lives and saving livelihoods. And I think the Beer Association of South Africa's position has always been very clear that, yes, getting the country through the pandemic is incredibly important, but it cannot be at the expense of livelihoods, at this type of rate that we are seeing it happen, particularly in your particular space. What sort of investments have the alcohol industry brought into public interest commitments during this period in time as part of the engagements that you've been having?
Oh, thanks, Lynette. And as you've said, we take this very seriously. I mean, we all have our own loved ones that have had COVID. We've had colleagues lose loved ones to COVID. So, we understand the seriousness of this. So we've, never said that we should be irresponsible in opening up trade. We've put forward really constructive options and suggestions as to how we can do this safely. But also, on the other hand, we have said that we need to be able to look at this in a long-term way, because as we've all seen, the virus keeps on manifesting and it keeps on growing, and it gets different strains all the time. So this is not a short-term fix. The virus is not going to go away in a month or 2 months. I've heard now of another new strain that's come out, I've read this morning. So we cannot, it's not a sustainable solution to continue to keep banning this alcohol industry. So we have made sure from the first onset of the virus that the PPEs are in place at all our outlets. We've helped those outlets who have not had the money because of the strain they were feeling to make sure that they get sanitizers in place. They understand what needs to be done at a level, at a place where you are interacting with customers. We've done training on the ground. We've even got patrollers over December. We've had 1,000 patrollers to help law enforcement to make sure people are adhering to the social distancing, wearing of masks. In Easter, we had 500 patrollers on the ground, and we continued with that because law enforcement is a huge issue in our country. We can have the best rules, the best laws, but if there's nobody to police and enforce, then we have a problem. So we've really tried as the alcohol industry to give support where we can. We also had some of our BASA members as well who gave contributions towards setting up the NASREC hospital or structure that was set up. That did not proceed in any event, but we were helping with the Solidarity Fund as well. So there's many interventions that we've put into place and showed up I think, as an industry, instead of abdicating responsibility. And I think that's one thing that we can never be accused of, is abdicating responsibility. We've really showed up, but I really think that's where the disappointment comes in, is that we've not been met halfway. And we cannot be held responsible for the spread of the virus. And I think that we are, in a sense, being punished for some of the inadequacies. So by now, for example, and I'm veering off a little bit in my answer, but I think it is important to mention this, that we all need to be vaccinated. We've offered, for example, to help with the logistics of that. If anything, our industry is best at logistics. We can get to the end of the country. And we've said, give us, we'll help you with that. But all our proposals, I think, go on deaf ears. And once again, I wonder if it does reach the people that need to hear it.
That's interesting, Patricia. And I think whilst we're just talking about other investments and interests, I'd love to come back to Apure. Apure, your business and its growth was also a business at a point in time that was funded by our development finance institutions. I'm pretty sure you've also even got commercial bank partners. And a lot of noise at the beginning of the pandemic was made about the importance of making sure SMEs in particular came through the pandemic itself. Being in your trade, have you gotten the same sort of access to support, to grants, to terms, even renewed terms around funding that you've perhaps seen extended to other sectors and industries and other young business? Is there adequate support from those type of partners who are willing to invest and ride out the wave, much to Patricia's point? We've all got to help each other ride it out. Can you give us an insight on that?
Yes, Lynette, unfortunately, talking from our own personal experience and also talking on behalf of my other colleagues within the industry, as a craft beer industry, we have not received much support from the industry as a small businesses. I mean, there's been a lot of funds that have been made available. We are, as craft brewers, we were told we don't qualify for. For example, the tourism industry, there was some monies that were made available, which we were, as a craft beer industry, we were told you don't qualify for. A lot of our members did apply for the TRS funds, also because we are, most of the craft breweries are like small family-owned businesses. So you find that a lot of the guys do not qualify for some of these help that is out there. On a personal note, I mean, I was funded by one of the government entities, and you read the story. Unfortunately, and for me, that was one of the biggest frustrations I had, where government entities will go on national TV, print front page newspapers to say there is money, billions made available for SMEs. But to get access to that money is not really available. And even when I asked for myself, I was told I needed to call a call center and apply. I mean, but I am within the database. When the government, when President announced the closure and ban of the alcohol industry, someone should have looked at the clients on the database and said, these are the clients at risk. How do you mitigate the risk? How do we assess these clients to waiver in the next few months? I was asked to provide projections, and as an industry, I mean, and I don't think anybody, even till today, Patricia says, the new variant that's currently top of town, when will that get to South Africa? Will we be ready as a country? Will we be well vaccinated, or will we again go for another alcohol ban? And that is the biggest frustration and strain for us, that we don't know till when. When is help coming? The help is not there. And what do you do in the meantime? And just having all those uncertainties is actually quite strenuous.
Sure. That's a very interesting, and I'm going to come back to some of that. But first, I want to just get some of the questions in that are coming in. And thank you so much to our audience who are sending them in. And, one of the questions for you, Nadine, that's come in this morning from Wayne has been to ask, has the illicit alcohol trade helped boost our economy at all, or impacted it negatively?
So thank you very much for that question. I think that's actually a very valid question to ask because essentially it does help individuals generate a profit. I mean, that is the incentive for illicit traders to basically try to find a way to survive. And in that case, I would say it has helped those individuals, but illicit trade is not, it does not help the economy from sort of a real inclusive way, and also doesn't contribute to the overall government revenues because, of course, they're avoiding taxes. So it really only benefits that very small group of individuals that are mainly criminal syndicates and tend to also be involved with not just illicit alcohol, but other types of illicit products or illegal products. So in a nutshell, I wouldn't say it is a good way of saying that it boosted the economy and definitely has detrimented the government's tax revenue collections.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for that question. Paula, a question for you that's also coming in from our audience, from Putela, says, does the extended alcohol ban not then cause individuals to seek alternatives, to quell everything from their trauma to their anxiety to their other stress, in the pharmaceutical sector then? So we move from perhaps the drink at the end of the day to over-the-counter painkillers and other medication. And what could be the ongoing repercussions of that?
So definitely, everybody will find different ways of coping with their situation or avoiding it in some ways. Some of the things that we used to have access to, like going to gym, for example, has been taken away. So we do find alternative ways of coping. Some people will just internalize it and keep quiet. And this is where the risk of the loneliness, the isolation, the disconnection, and the depression comes in, which then links to suicidal thoughts. At the same time, we will turn to things like pain medication, sleeping tablets, other forms of coping mechanisms. So it definitely is important to, first of all, from a self point of view, understand, well, what am I experiencing? What is going on for me? And really getting in touch with the emotions, naming it. Generally we go, I'm sad, mad, or glad, or I'm stressed. We don't unpack that and go, okay, if I'm stressed, what really am I experiencing and where is it coming from? How do I know that I'm stressed? And then what am I choosing to do about it? So definitely, and then of course, we all know, and this is part of why we're having this discussion, is where there's a means, there's a way, and we will find access to something like the tobacco ban, like the alcohol ban, to try and get those needs met.
Right. Patricia, as we speak about some of these social investments and very much, what we're talking about as part of this conversation, one of our guests, Kati Paizi, has asked, do any of our panelists, and I think, Patricia, this is probably directed best at you, have any opinions on the pending legal action by Vinpro and South African breweries against the government? Is this the right path? Is this the only path, I guess? And what are the chances of success of the route that is now being taken, given that from all intent and purposes, all engagements and meetings of stakeholders have seemingly failed?
I think thanks for that question. I think it's such an important discussion that we're having here today, and it leads to then those incidents of decisions taken where you have to actually look at what are your options and alternatives. And when you're put into a corner the way we have as an industry with now fourth ban and all of these, if you look at the value chain, there's 1 million livelihoods in the entire alcohol value chain that are now at stake. Then you are put in that corner and you do then look to the courts for some kind of support. As BASA, we have always said that the court is always a last resort, especially during the time of a pandemic. The last thing we want to do is inundate government with further court papers and take their attention away from dealing with the pandemic. But in saying that as well, who else is going to be there to fight for the livelihoods of our people? People like Aphiwe that's on the panel with us today, and those other, a million that we're looking at. So for us, really, we are supportive of the SAB in particular. That's our member who's gone this route, because if we cannot get answers, we cannot get access to information. We, for example, have asked for information on how is the MAC, what research are they using to give that advice to the Command Council? And we're not privy to that information. And I think there should be more transparency with regards to these decisions that are made. So for us, we are supportive of it. It is sad that we had to come to this. We ideally would like to work with government, and we've always said that. Let's collaborate. This is all of our problem. It's a global problem. And let's work together as a country with government and the social partners. But unfortunately, we've been left out in the cold, and we've not been given answers and responses. And so now we've had to turn to the courts.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for that. Whilst we're just dealing with the issue of data, how decisions are made and transparency, I've got another question here from Wayne. And Nadine, I wonder if you would have the answer to this, but do we have any sense of the loss of investment that would result in our economy? And I guess different spheres as well as different work streams. If the alcohol industry as a whole retracted both its resources and investments.
Okay, thank you for that. So I don't have a size of how this would impact going forward, but just to look at some of the historically what some of the bans have impacted, the investments that we've seen as a loss in the industry, we've seen South African breweries halt about 5 billion rand in investments in terms of a production facility. We've also seen Heineken cancel about 6 billion rand investment. And also not just the industry itself, but other related industries such as glass manufacturing, also suspending about 1.5 billion rands worth of investment in the industry in South Africa. So what we are seeing is essentially a filtering through of not only a lower investment in expansion of manufacturing facilities in the alcohol industry itself, but those filtering through to other sectors, which essentially really has a spillover effect into many more industries than just the alcohol industry. So in a nutshell, I would imagine that further bans would only see even more of a loss of investment from these industries, and could even result in more closures of small businesses, those microbreweries, as the Aphiwe has already said. The industry is really struggling. So these major investment companies having showing a lower levels of investment, but essentially these small to medium-sized liquor manufacturers are facing bankruptcy, having an even further impact, or sort of a negative impact on South Africa's economic recovery.
Maybe perhaps pose a broader question to the whole panel off the back of that particular question. I think we all on this panel have an appreciation about the delicate balances that we're trying to achieve. And each of you in your own individual spaces have dealt with a number of really pressing challenges related to the bans and related to the sector, as it were. But if for a moment we were able to sit at the table with all of the stakeholders required to make different decisions, what would be some of the priority decisions, as well as the alternative solutions you would love to put on the table on behalf of the constituency that each of you represent this morning? And anybody is welcome to answer that question, or you're all welcome to answer that question.
Okay, I'll start.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone is quiet, sorry. Personally, I've been looking back to the very first alcohol ban that we had. I honestly believe that had at that time allowed of consumption, and put in restrictions rather than a total ban, that would have allowed South Africans to learn the culture of responsible drinking, the culture of buying up alcohol and taking it home and drinking by yourself, not having to be with friends. Because I mean, on one level, we all see, we know people that have a drinking problem, that do not understand what it means when we talk of responsible drinking. People that when they start drinking, it is a must that they have to be are surrounded by other people. It's a must that they must drive somewhere. And that is a culture that has been a norm in the country. And I feel that the government didn't want to address that or use any energies to try and reteach, if that's the right word. And had we at the first ban done that, I honestly believe we wouldn't be where we are today. It would have been a norm. We would still maybe have one or two of those odd people that would still want together, but with the policing and improving on our policing and putting more measures on that. I mean, during the first ban, we had soldiers on the street. People were scared. We had the full country's buy-in. People didn't want to be seen drinking because they were scared of being arrested. Now nobody cares. Because over the few months, those who have been arrested for having a beer here or there, nothing has happened. So, that personally for me, I think could have worked.
Thanks, Apiwe, for that, alternative to how we are dealing with even the enforcement and regularization of behavior in our society. To the rest of the ladies, I think I see you, Paula, ready to go.
Yeah, I think just to follow on from what Apiwe has said, and to say that, we can't keep blaming alcohol for gender-based violence. Gender-based violence was a pandemic that was around long before COVID came about. Unfortunately, it has just put the spotlight on gender-based violence. And I think for me, there are three ways that we can address this going forward. One, from our own homes and our own communities, and talking about gender-based violence like we do about the pandemic. Have you masked up? Have you sanitized? Have you washed your hands, etc.? We need to be talking about what is and is not acceptable behavior and how we raise our boy children and our girl children. And we need to make it an everyday conversation to get comfortable with talking about this. And we can learn from each other. It's both men and women's responsibilities to change this narrative going forward. From a business point of view, businesses, especially now with being working from home, but also going forward with hybrid working models, businesses are now starting to realize not safe working from home because they cannot escape their toxic environment. And they are experiencing instances. So they need to build it into their employee wellness and well-being initiatives to provide support structures for employees. And to educate employees around gender-based violence. And, it's not just male on female abuse, it's female on male abuse, it's child abuse at home, it's the LGBTQI sector, etc. And then from a national government point of view, support structures and making sure that we have the funding for those support structures like power, like shelters and places of safety, etc. It's a collective. We need to work together. And lastly, just like COVID, we're learning globally from other countries how they are winning the war against it. We and best practices from everywhere around the world how to tackle GBV because it's a global pandemic as well.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that response. Nadine, I don't know if anything's coming from you on if you had...
Yes, thank you. If you was mentioning just the first ban, what could have been done during the first ban, or if we had to place restrictions, and that also just got me thinking about, the excessive drinking culture that South Africa does have. And when you place this type of individual, type of consumer under a ban, they tend to find other ways to obtain that alcohol. And that's where the illicit alcohol also becomes, it becomes something that is a very much a risk for those vulnerable individuals, those vulnerable communities, and just basically by that on that topic, what could the government do, or what could individuals do, or companies or industry do in ways to reduce that excessive consumption? And a ban in this case is not, I would say, it's not the best answer. It would be on trying to encourage, find the root of cause of this type of behavior. On the one hand, on the other hand, also to look at enforcement and really encouraging those individuals, those industries to work together, which I think we've seen already an improvement in. But when individuals get caught for selling illegal alcohol or counterfeit alcohol that's very detrimental for health reasons, they face only a small fine and end up paying these fines with their profits that they make. And a few weeks later, will pop up a shop or a manufacturing facility later down in a different area. The enforcement of regulations is also really essential, and sort of increasing consumer education around excessive drinking and finding the root cause of that.
Yeah, there are definitely, I think we can all agree, so many layers to a society and so many layers to effecting, behavioral change. But I think until we actually go back to those root causes, the root hurt, the root trauma, the roots that drive certain of our excess, is only then that we can also begin to promote what becomes normalcy. Patricia, I know that you would definitely have points to write into it, but I'd like to give my closing question to you as part of this, is over and above your suggestions and solutions to how do we turn this almost untenable situation around? If this ban is extended, which, looking at the statistics, of the numbers, particularly as we came out of the weekend and the like, may very well be likely. If it's extended at this point in time, what is our plan D? Because that's almost where the industry needs to go now, from your perspective. And how do we almost enforce, much to Nadine's point, a position that changes this game from, where it has been to a necessary game, so that we, again, going back to the balance of saving lives, but also saving these very, very important livelihoods in your value chain?
Thanks, Lynette. I think for us as an industry, we've always said that we must use evidence-based research, etc., to make decisions. And I think one of the main concerns is that we don't believe that that is being done. And if it is being done, we haven't seen that evidence, because when you look at some of the studies that are out there, there's a definite link between the reducing of mobility and then the impact in terms of what happens at hospitals. So there's less people on the road. So there's less accidents, there's less gatherings. So we were one of those as the beer industry who were actually fans and advocates of a curfew. Surprisingly enough, we were really advocates of that, because we saw the difference on a short term that this made. And we really did feel like we were opened up too quickly to just start roaming again. We felt that essential services that needed to be out late, that's great. But if not, be at home, limit your gatherings and your mobility, because there is evidence based on that help with regards to that. The other evidence is in terms of gatherings. Like I've said, when people gather, that's when you spread. And so we were also against opening up of gatherings. We always felt that as an industry, we had a responsibility, and right at the onset of COVID, as an alcohol industry, as a collective, we banned all sponsored events. And we said we were not going to do gatherings. And we stuck to that, and we are still continuing with that. So gatherings for me should not have also been opened up, and should continue to be limited. And I understand that people need to do various activities, but we have online now, and we need to make that work for us until this pandemic has passed. I think when you look at this, it has to be short, medium, and long-term solutions. And the things that you and Nadine were talking about, for example, in terms of looking at root causes, and what Paula was saying about GBV, etc. Drinking and binge drinking is a culture in South Africa that's long and systemic. It's a social issue. And it's not a COVID issue, but almost the narrative around COVID has become an alcohol narrative. And I think that's wholly unfair. And the one thing I would say that we need more of, and when you also talk about a plan D, is we have to have government being more transparent with us. We have to be part of the decision-making process. And I can assure you, Lynette, nothing's going to change until we get a proper seat at that table where we're able to take all of this data, all of our findings, people that are on the ground in our industry sharing what's going on, the people, the experts like Paula who can bring in what's going on in our country from an emotional level, the data experts like your Nadines, etc., and really come to a solution together. But if we go into continue to work in isolation, nothing is going to change. And really, we are able and willing to get to that table and work. I mean, we're at a point now where we're calling on the presidency to say, please intervene, because we cannot sustain another ban. This industry is already decimated. And if you want to see smaller livelihoods especially impacted, bigger businesses are already impacted themselves, looking at retrenchments, etc. But imagine the livelihoods like the PWEs who are now just shut down. And so this is what we need to say, and what we're calling for now is to say, please, we need a seat at that table. We'll come up with these solutions, which we have, and let's then find each other through this, because we cannot solve this alone. Government cannot do it alone. We can't do it alone as business. We all need to come together as social partners.
Absolutely. Patricia, thank you so much for that closing shot. And ladies, thank you for your time this morning, your insights, the statistics, as well as the experiences, many personal experiences that you have also afforded and shared with us all as we have listened to this dialogue this morning. I think certainly for me, the takeaways of this particular conversation was to say there are critical and courageous conversations that need to be had urgently. Collaboration is further required and almost needs to be enhanced at a whole new level in order for us to have the type of positive change and the positive impact that we can have, not just on lives, but also the very livelihoods that are central to the economic recovery of the country for its ongoing sustainability and its ongoing stability. Thank you very much to our hosts at the Business Day for this dialogue in partnership with the Beer Association of South Africa. My name is Lynette Nduli, and it's been an absolute pleasure to host this conversation. And I certainly look forward to many more conversations of this nature, which bring us and edge us closer to a better society, a better economy, better lives, and ultimately a better South Africa for all. Thank you.